A biker gang shoves a farmer's daughter outside Murphy's diner, then laughs as the college girl hits the pavement hard. The leather-clad thugs circle around her like wolves, their leader making crude threats while 20 gang members rev their engines in support. But the quiet stranger sipping coffee inside isn't just another small-town customer. This is Steven Seagal himself. The bikers have no idea they just assaulted an innocent girl in front of a man who spent decades perfecting the art of silent justice. While the gang leader grabs the terrified daughter by the arm, the action legend sets down his cup and moves toward the door with that unmistakable, deadly calm. The farmer's daughter sees her unlikely savior approaching and knows these bullies picked the wrong victim at the wrong diner. The gang keeps laughing and filming, thinking they're intimidating another helpless civilian, but they're actually about to learn why some legends never retire. What happens when 20 bikers face off against a one-man army? Will the gang survive? Discovering that real heroes don't need backup? What happened next would terrorize the thugs for the rest of their pathetic lives. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn broke over the Coleman family farm like a golden promise, painting the wheat fields in shades of amber and gold. Frank Coleman walked the dirt path between his crops, running the ripe stalks through his weathered fingers. At 58, he still rose before the sun, just as his father had taught him, and his grandfather before that. 3 generations of Colemans had worked this Montana soil, and Frank intended to make it forward that the wheat was perfect, his best crop in 20 years. Each stalk stood tall and proud, heavy with grain that would feed families across the country. Frank smiled, remembering how his grandfather used to say that farming wasn't just about growing food, it was about growing hope. This harvest would pay for Becky's final year of college, maybe even leave enough to upgrade the irrigation system. The phone's shrill ring from the farmhouse shattered the morning peace. Frank jogged back, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. Donna met him at the kitchen door, her face tight with worry. "Consolidated Agriculture again," she said, holding out the cordless phone. "Third call this week." Frank's jaw clenched as he took the receiver. The corporate voice on the other end was smooth, practiced, threatening, wrapped in silk. The offer hadn't changed, half the farm's actual value, with a thinly veiled warning about changing circumstances for farmers who refuse to sell. "My answer's the same as yesterday," Frank said. "This land isn't for sale." He hung up and stared at the stack of bills on the kitchen table. College tuition, equipment loans, insurance premiums. The numbers added up to more pressure than any man should carry, but Frank had carried worse. He'd survived droughts, market crashes, and corporate raiders before. He'd survived this too. Through the window, a convoy of black SUVs crawled past the property line, their tinted windows reflecting the morning sun like dead eyes. The vehicles moved slowly, deliberately, passengers inside photographing every building, every access road, every weakness. Frank stepped onto the porch, his hands curling into fists as he watched the corporate scouts. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and pregnant with rain. Or maybe something worse. The SUVs disappeared over the hill, but their message lingered like smoke in the air. Consolidated Agriculture wasn't just making offers anymore. They were making threats. Becky Coleman's beat-up Honda Civic rattled into the farmyard, loaded down with textbooks and the determination of youth. At 19, she carried herself with the confident stride of someone who'd grown up believing problems had solutions if you were smart enough to find them. "Daddy," she launched herself into Frank's arms, breathing in the familiar scent of honest sweat and soil. Home smelled like possibility, like the future she was fighting to build. Over dinner, Becky spread her laptop and research papers across the kitchen table like a general planning battle. "I've been studying Consolidated Agriculture," she announced, pulling up corporate filings and news articles. "They've used these exact tactics in 12 other states. Buy cheap, consolidate into industrial operations, destroy family farming." Frank pushed food around his plate, appetite gone. "Honey, this isn't some college case study. These people play for keeps. Which is exactly why we need to fight smart." Becky countered. Her mother's kind eyes flashed with her father's stubborn fire. "Agricultural law, environmental protections, community organizing. We have weapons they don't expect us to use." Donna reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. We're proud of you, sweetheart. But pride won't protect you if these people decide you're a threat. Then we make sure the law protects us. Becky's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up legal precedents and regulatory filings. Look at this pattern: mysterious accidents, equipment failures, livestock poisonings. It's all here in black and white. After her parents went to bed, Becky sat alone with her research, the kitchen light casting long shadows across her notes. The data told a chilling story of systematic intimidation, of families driven from land their ancestors had farmed for generations. The rumble in the distance made her look up from the screen. Motorcycle engines, growing closer then fading into the night. Becky peered through the curtains into darkness, seeing nothing but feeling everything. The sound lingered in her ears like a warning. She turned back to her laptop, but the cheerful glow of the screen couldn't chase away the cold knot forming in her stomach. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd drive into town and start building the coalition that would save not just their farm, but their entire way of life that Murphy's Diner sat at. The heart of Cedar Ridge like an old friend, its neon sign flickering in the morning light. At 7 a.m., the parking lot already held the trucks and sedans of early risers, farmers grabbing coffee before dawn chores, postal workers starting their routes, Sheriff Morrison reading incident reports over his usual breakfast at a dusty Ford F-150 pulled into the lot, unremarkable except for the careful way its driver scanned the area before shutting off the engine. Steven Seagal stepped out, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of controlled motion. In worn jeans and a flannel shirt, he looked like any other contractor or consultant passing through rural Montana. The bell above the diner door chimed as he entered. Conversations paused for the brief moment small towns always gave strangers, then resumed with the easy acceptance that defined rural hospitality. Seagal chose a corner booth with clear sightlines to both entrances, spreading topographical maps and water survey documents across the Formica table. Coffee haunt. Marge, the waitress who'd been serving locals for 30 years, appeared with a steaming pot. Black, please. Seagal's voice carried quiet authority wrapped in politeness. I'm Steve Lawson, Environmental Consulting, checking water rights compliance in the area. Sheriff Morrison glanced over from his newspaper, taking note of the stranger's gear and bearing. Something about the man's posture suggested more than civilian consulting work, but everyone had secrets. As long as they didn't cause trouble, secrets were allowed to stay buried. Seagal studied his maps with professional focus, making careful notes about water table access and recent corporate land purchases. The documents told their own story: systematic pressure on family farms, environmental violations ignored by local authorities, regulatory capture at the county level. His pen paused over a survey marking. Fresh motorcycle tire tracks crisscrossed the diner's parking lot, multiple bikes carrying heavy loads. The patterns suggested a scouting mission, predators marking territory before the hunt began. Seagal finished his coffee and left exact change on the table, nodding politely to other diners. Outside, he studied the tire tracks more carefully, reading the story they told. 20 bikes, recent arrival, organized formation. Not weekend warriors or casual riders. Professional troublemakers. The rumble started as a vibration in the earth, growing into thunder that shook windows and rattled teeth. Highway 2, east of Cedar Ridge, carried the sound like a war drum, announcing the arrival of 20 Harley-Davidson motorcycles riding in perfect formation. They crested the hill like harbingers of chaos, leather-clad figures in black and red, their bikes gleaming chrome and steel under the Montana sun. The Crimson Skulls motorcycle gang didn't ride for pleasure. They rode for business, and business was intimidation. Viper Jackson led the pack, his prison tattoos visible beneath rolled sleeves, his pale blue eyes scanning the countryside like a predator selecting prey. At 45, he'd spent half his life behind bars and the other half earning his way back. The gang followed his lead with military precision. Ex-cons, drug dealers, and men who'd chosen violence as their primary means of communication. Cedar Ridge's main street emptied as the motorcycles roared through town. Shop owners stepped back. From windows, mothers pulled children inside, and Sheriff Morrison watched helplessly from his office doorway. 20 armed criminals against one aging lawman and no backup for 3 hours. The gang didn't stop in town. They continued to the abandoned Miller farm, 2 miles past the city limits, where broken windows and collapsed outbuildings provided perfect cover for illegal activities. Viper surveyed the ruins with satisfaction, close enough to Town 4. Intimidation, isolated enough for privacy. Wade Torres, Viper's lieutenant, pulled up beside his leader. At 38, Torres had muscles built in prison weight rooms and scars earned in knife fights. His smile never reached his eyes, and his hands bore tattoos celebrating violence against women. Sweet setup, boss, Torres said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. These farm boys won't know what hit them. That's the point. Viper studied a list of local properties, his finger tracing addresses and property values. We're not here to play games. Consolidated Agriculture wants these farmers gone, and we're going to make that happen. Torres pointed toward the Coleman farm visible in the distance. The college girl lives there. Daddy's little princess might need some education. Viper's smile was cold as winter wind. Tomorrow we start teaching lessons. Time these people learn what happens when they don't take good advice. The gang settled into their temporary headquarters, weapons and drugs appearing from saddlebags and backpacks. Cedar Ridge had just become a battlefield, and the first shots would be fired at dawn. Becky Coleman loaded 50-pound feed sacks into her Honda Civic, the morning sun already heating the Murphy's Diner parking lot. She'd risen early to beat the rush. Wanting to get supplies back to the farm before the day's heat made the work unbearable. She didn't notice the 3 motorcycles following her into town. Wade Torres and 2 gang members watched from across the street as Becky struggled with the heavy bags. Torres's eyes lit up with predatory interest. College girls needed lessons in respect, and he was eager to provide education. Look at that, Torres said, revving his engine. Daddy's little princess. Thinks she's tough. The bikers roared across the parking lot, surrounding Becky's car before she could react. Torres dismounted, his steel-toed boots crunching on gravel as he approached. His companions flanked him, grinning at the anticipated entertainment. Need help, sweetheart? Torres grabbed Becky's arm as she tried to load another bag. College girls shouldn't be doing man's work. Becky jerked away, her jaw set with Coleman's stubbornness. I can handle it myself, thanks. Can you now? Torres's grip tightened, his fingers digging into her flesh. Maybe you need to learn some manners. Inside the diner, Steven Seagal's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Through the window, he watched the confrontation unfold with the focused intensity of a predator recognizing prey. The moment Torres touched Becky, something shifted in Seagal's expression, a calm, deadly stillness that preceded violence. Becky tried to pull away, but Torres shoved her hard against her car. Her head struck the door frame with a sickening crack, and she crumpled to the pavement. The gang members laughed, their cruel voices echoing off the diner's walls. Seagal set down his cup with deliberate precision. No hurry, no panic, just the measured movements of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of controlled destruction. He stood, left exact change on the table, and walked toward the back door. The bikers continued their harassment, unaware that death had just risen from a corner booth and was circling behind them like smoke. Excuse me, gentlemen. The voice came from behind them, soft and polite, but carrying an authority that made Torres turn. An unremarkable man in flannel and jeans stood 10 feet away, his hands relaxed at his sides, his expression calm as still water. Walk away, old man, Torres snarled, or you'll get the same. He never finished the sentence. Seagal moved like flowing water, redirecting Torres's wild punch into a devastating throw that sent the gang member crashing into a pickup truck. The second biker lunged forward, only to find his legs swept from under him while precise fingers found the nerve cluster in his neck. He dropped like a stone. The third attacker reached for a knife, but Seagal was already there. A simple wrist control became a joint lock. The blade clattered harmlessly across asphalt, and another gang member joined his friends in unconsciousness. 15 seconds. 3 armed men neutralized without permanent damage, just professional efficiency applied with surgical precision. Seagal helped Becky to her feet, his touch gentle as a father's. Are you hurt, miss? Becky shook her head, staring at her rescuer in amazement. The quiet stranger who'd emerged from the diner moved like something from a movie, all controlled power and deadly grace. Thank you, she whispered. Seagal simply nodded and walked away, leaving 3 gang members groaning on the pavement and a young woman who'd just witnessed real-world heroism. Sheriff Morrison arrived 30 minutes later to find ambulances loading unconscious bikers. Torres sported a broken arm. The others had concussions and various injuries that would heal with time and humility. Witness interviews revealed conflicting accounts. Some saw everything. Others claimed distraction at crucial moments. Marge, the waitress, described a polite customer who'd paid for coffee and left. Becky provided statements but protected her rescuer's identity, describing only a good Samaritan who helped. Meanwhile, Seagal continued his environmental survey work at the Coleman farm, testing water samples with scientific precision. Frank watched him work, noting the military bearing, the constant situational awareness, the movements of someone trained for violence. "I know you," Frank said quietly. Seagal looked up from his equipment. "I don't think we've met, Mr. Coleman." But Frank's eyes held recognition, and his weathered face showed the dawning realization that help had arrived in the most unlikely form. Midnight at the abandoned Miller farm. Viper Jackson paced through the ruins like a caged animal, his fury radiating. Heat in the cool night air. Torres sat nearby, his arm in a cast, humiliation burning brighter than pain. "One man," Viper's voice dripped venom. "One fucking man took down 3 of my boys." A black sedan whispered into the compound, its headlights cutting through darkness. Mayor Russell Kane emerged, his expensive suit inappropriate for the surroundings. Sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. "We have a problem," Kane announced, mopping his brow with a silk handkerchief. "You think?" Torres spat, flexing his broken arm. "Some karate hero made us look like amateurs." Kane pulled out a manila envelope thick with cash and photographs. "Forget your wounded pride. Consolidated Agriculture is paying us $50,000 to make these farmers sell. The Coleman farm is the key. Their water rights control access for surrounding properties." Viper studied aerial photographs of local farms, his finger tracing property lines and access roads. "What exactly are you asking us to do? Scare them. Don't kill them. This has to look like random violence, not a coordinated campaign." Kane's voice shook slightly. "Contaminate wells, burn barns, make it too dangerous to stay. But nothing that screams conspiracy." Torres leaned forward, eager for revenge. "What about the mystery man who broke my arm?" "Find out who he is," Viper ordered. "But the girl comes first. Daddy's little princess needs to understand consequences." Kane climbed back into his sedan, leaving behind cash and targeting information. As his taillights disappeared, Viper gathered his men around the photographs. "Tomorrow night we start the real work," he announced. "But first, we settle scores. I want to know everything about this good Samaritan who thinks he can embarrass the Crimson Skulls." The gang studied their targets by lamplight. Family farms, innocent people, a way of life that would be destroyed for corporate profit. They felt no guilt, no hesitation. Violence was their business, and business was about to boom. In the distance, coyotes howled at the moon, their voices carrying across the prairie like warnings of the storm to come. 2 a.m. Silent figures moved through the Coleman farm like ghosts, carrying gasoline and matches. Frank's prize wheat field stretched golden under moonlight, 30 acres of perfect grain ready for harvest, ready to burn. The coordinated attacks hit 3 farms simultaneously. At the Coleman place, gang members poisoned livestock water troughs and splashed accelerant across the wheat field. The Martinez family lost their well to contamination. The Peterson Farms barn erupted in flames that lit the night sky orange. Frank and Donna woke to dancing light on their bedroom walls and the acrid smell of smoke. They rushed outside to find their life's work transforming into a pillar of fire that reached toward the stars. "Dear God," Donna whispered, her hand clutching Frank's arm. Neighbors arrived within minutes, forming bucket brigades and calling volunteer firefighters. But 30 acres of drought-dry wheat burned too fast for human intervention. 3 generations of Coleman farming turned to ash and smoke while the family watched helplessly. Sheriff Morrison coordinated the response, his radio crackling with reports from other attacked farms. The pattern was clear: systematic terrorism. Designed to break spirits along with property, as dawn broke over the devastation. Firefighters packed their equipment, and neighbors offered what comfort they could. The Coleman farm lay wounded, its heart burned out, its future uncertain. Seagal's pickup truck appeared on the ridge overlooking the blackened field. He walked down to where Frank stood among the ashes of his heritage, Donna and Becky beside him, all staring at the destruction. Frank looked at Seagal with recognition and desperation. "I know who you are," he whispered. "Steven Seagal." Seagal met his eyes, the mask finally dropping. "Then you know this ends tonight." The words carried promise and threat in equal measure. The movie star was about to become the action hero, and Cedar Ridge would never be the same. The Coleman family kitchen felt like a war room at dawn. Steven Seagal sat across from Frank, Donna, and Becky, his cover identity abandoned like yesterday's clothes. Coffee steamed between them, but the conversation was cold as winter steel. "I came here investigating EPA water rights violations," Seagal began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing federal agents. "Environmental groups reported systematic contamination in agricultural areas. What I found runs much deeper." He spread documents across the kitchen table, corporate filings, bank records, intercepted communications. Consolidated agriculture isn't just buying land. They're stealing it through systematic intimidation. Mayor Kane facilitates the theft through zoning changes and selective law enforcement. Frank studied a photograph of Kane shaking hands with corporate executives. "How long has this been going on?" 12 states over 5 years. They target family farms with prime water access, then use illegal tactics to force sales below market value. Seagal's finger traced property surveys. "Your farm controls water rights for surrounding properties. Take you down, they control everything." Becky leaned forward, her college research suddenly feeling inadequate. "The Crimson Skulls are just hired muscle. Worse, they're connected to organized crime networks across 3 states. This isn't random violence, it's corporate terrorism with federal implications." Seagal met each family member's eyes. "I'm not just an actor who happens to know martial arts. I maintain federal law enforcement credentials. This is what I do." Donna's teacher instincts recognized truth when she heard it. "You could report this to the FBI and walk away. Some fights require more than paperwork." Seagal stood, his decision made. "Your family represents everything worth protecting in this country. 3 generations of honest work, environmental stewardship, community values. I won't let corporate predators destroy that." Frank extended his weathered hand. "What do you need from us?" "Trust," Seagal replied, clasping the farmer's grip. "And the courage to see this through. Because before it's over, things are going to get much worse." Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark with the promise of violence to come. Seagal's hotel room had transformed into a command center, worthy of federal law enforcement. Laptops hummed with encrypted connections to intelligence databases, surveillance photos covered the walls, and criminal profiles spread across every available surface. Using contacts cultivated over decades of federal cooperation, Seagal built detailed dossiers on each enemy. Viper Jackson's file read like a catalog of human evil: murder, drug trafficking, racketeering, with 15 years in federal prison that had only sharpened his criminal skills. Wade Torres specialized in violence against women, suspected in 3 unsolved sexual assaults across state lines. His psychological profile suggested escalating behavior, a predator who'd found perfect cover within gang operations. The Crimson Skulls operated a network spanning 3 states: drugs, weapons, extortion, using motorcycle rallies as cover for criminal conferences. Recent intercepted communications revealed expansion plans, new territory acquisitions, and connections to Mexican cartels. Consolidated Agriculture's corporate profile showed a pattern of environmental violations and illegal land acquisition in 12 states. CEO Marcus Webb maintained political connections reaching Washington, D.C., using campaign contributions and lobbying pressure to avoid prosecution. Mayor Kane's financial records revealed the desperation that made corruption attractive. Gambling debts, failed investments, and mounting legal bills had left him vulnerable to corporate bribery. Bank deposits coinciding with zoning decisions painted a clear picture of purchased influence. Seagal printed mugshots and criminal records, studying each face with professional detachment. These weren't cartoon villains. They were dangerous predators who'd chosen crime as their life's work. His secure phone buzzed with a text from Frank Coleman. "More fires last night. Peterson family packing up to leave. How do we stop this? Seagal typed back. We take away their protection. Tomorrow night, everything changes. He closed the files and began checking weapons and equipment. Intelligence gathering was complete. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Outside his window, Cedar Ridge slept fitfully under siege, unaware that Salvation was loading magazines and planning tactical operations in a roadside motel room. Sheriff Morrison's office had never hosted a briefing with federal implications. Seagal arrived with boxes of evidence documenting the conspiracy, his credentials opening doors that local law enforcement couldn't approach. Steven Seagal. Morrison shook his head in amazement. 30 years wearing this badge. Never thought I'd need a movie star to save my town. I stopped being just a movie star the day I took an oath to protect innocent people, Seagal replied, spreading federal quality documentation across the sheriff's desk. That oath doesn't expire. The evidence was overwhelming, recorded conversations between Kane and corporate representatives, financial transfers coinciding with gang activities, documented intimidation patterns. Morrison studied the materials with growing hope and determination. FBI agents are already en route from Billings, Seagal continued. But legal processes take time. Meanwhile, families are under siege. They developed a two-pronged strategy combining legal action with tactical intervention. Tomorrow night's emergency town council meeting would serve as bait. When the gang came to intimidate farmers, federal agents would be positioned for arrests. What about immediate threats? Morrison asked. I handle those personally. Seagal's voice carried quiet finality. These criminals forfeited mercy when they threatened innocent families. Morrison unlocked his weapons safe, offering additional firepower. Seagal selected only what he needed, precision over overwhelming force. Surgical strikes rather than military assault. The gang expects intimidation to work, Seagal explained. They've never faced real opposition. Tomorrow night, they learn the difference between terrorizing civilians and confronting a professional. As evening approached, both men felt the weight of approaching confrontation. Morrison would coordinate with federal agents and protect the community meeting. Seagal would eliminate the source of terror at its foundation. Any regrets about getting involved? Morrison asked. Seagal checked his equipment one final time. My only regret would be walking away when good people needed help. Some fights choose you. This one chose me the moment Torres put his hands on that girl. Cedar Ridge Community Center buzzed with nervous energy as farmers and families packed the emergency town council meeting. Federal agents in civilian clothes blended with the crowd, their professional alertness visible to trained eyes. Frank Coleman took the podium, his voice steady despite the magnitude of revelations he was about to share. Friends, we're here because our community is under attack, not by drought or market forces, but by criminal conspiracy. FBI agent Sarah Martinez stepped forward, her badge gleaming under fluorescent lights. Federal investigation has uncovered systematic corruption involving Mayor Kane, Consolidated Agriculture, and the Crimson Skulls motorcycle gang. The evidence presentation stunned the audience. Recorded conversations, financial documents, proof of coordination between corporate interests and criminal violence. Kane's face went white as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Russell Kane, you're under arrest for federal corruption, conspiracy, and violation of civil rights, Martinez announced. The corrupt mayor was led away in disgrace while his constituents watched justice unfold. Federal agents moved swiftly to arrest gang members, but radio reports from the Miller Farm compound brought disappointing news. The location was empty, cleaned out with military efficiency. They anticipated this, Agent Martinez told the crowd. But we've disrupted their operations and arrested their political protection. Celebration erupted among the farmers. Frank Coleman hugged his wife and daughter as neighbors shared hope. For the future, corporate terrorism had been exposed, justice was being served, and the legal system had triumphed. Seagal stood apart from the festivities, studying intelligence reports on his phone. Something felt wrong. The gang's retreat was too clean, too organized. His tactical instincts screamed warnings about cornered predators and desperate measures. The Coleman farmhouse phone rang, cutting through celebration like a blade. Donna answered, listened, then screamed, a sound that froze every heart in the community center. Her voice carried across the sudden silence. "They have Becky." The victory celebration died instantly, replaced by every parent's worst nightmare. The real battle was just beginning. The Coleman farmhouse erupted in chaos. Donna collapsed into Frank's arms, her teacher's composure shattered by maternal terror. Neighbors gathered in stunned silence while Sheriff Morrison coordinated with FBI agents. Their celebration transformed into a parent's worst nightmare. Seagal moved through the scene with professional detachment, studying physical evidence with the focused intensity of someone trained in hostage recovery. Tire tracks in the barn's soft earth told the story. Multiple attackers, coordinated approach. Becky grabbed while checking on the horses. Professional extraction, he told Agent Martinez. No witnesses, minimal evidence, planned as insurance. Against legal pressure, the phone rang with mechanical precision. Frank's trembling hand lifted the receiver, putting it on speaker as Viper Jackson's voice filled the kitchen like poison. "Listen carefully, Farmer. Your little princess is alive for now. All federal charges dropped, 100,000 cash. Safe passage to Mexico, or she dies. You have 12 hours. Please," Donna whispered. "She's just a child. Should have thought about that before calling the feds." Viper's laugh was cold as winter wind. "Any attempt to approach our compound results in immediate execution." Clock's ticking. The line went dead, leaving behind silence heavy with desperation. Agent Martinez immediately began coordinating with hostage rescue teams, but her expression revealed the harsh truth. Specialized units were 6 hours away. Negotiations had failed before they started. Frank confronted Seagal with desperate eyes. "You're not just an environmental consultant or movie star. You're something else, aren't you?" Seagal was already checking weapons, applying camouflage paint to his face, with the practiced movements of someone who'd prepared for violence many times before. His transformation from consultant to warrior was complete. "I'm a father who's lost children to violence," he said quietly. "I'm someone who understands that sometimes good people need protection while justice takes its course. And right now, I'm the only chance your daughter has." The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Steven Seagal, actor and federal operative, was about to become the action hero his movies had only pretended he was. Sunset painted the Miller Farm compound in shades of blood and shadow. Seagal sat in meditation on a hill overlooking the target, achieving the mental stillness that preceded controlled violence. Below, broken buildings and defensive barriers housed 15 armed criminals and one innocent girl. Through military-grade surveillance equipment, he mapped guard positions and identified weaknesses. The compound's defenses were designed to repel frontal law enforcement assault, barriers channeling attackers into kill zones, overlapping fields of fire, multiple escape routes. But Seagal wasn't planning an assault. He was planning infiltration. Thermal imaging revealed Becky in a second-floor room, guarded by 2 men. The building's construction offered multiple entry points invisible to defenders focused on perimeter security. His equipment check revealed the tools of his trade: lock picks, restraints, communication gear, medical supplies, and weapons selected for precision rather than firepower. Agent Martinez's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Hostage rescue teams are 4 hours out. Can you wait?" "Negative." Seagal studied guard rotations through his scope. "These aren't rational criminals. They're cornered predators who'll kill the hostage rather than face capture." Window of opportunity is closing. He left a sealed envelope with Sheriff Morrison, final instructions, and personal effects. "If I don't come back, make sure the Coleman family knows they gave me a chance to be the hero I've always played on screen." Morrison gripped his shoulder. "Bring her home. That's the plan." Seagal checked his watch. Full darkness in 30 minutes. Federal perimeter closure in 60. Perfect timing for a ghost operation. As night fell, he applied final equipment checks with the methodical precision of someone who'd survived by preparing for every contingency. The quiet consultant was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, a federal operative with personal motivation and professional skills. That he moved toward the compound perimeter, becoming one with shadows and silence. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, an innocent girl waited for rescue. And Steven Seagal had never failed a mission when innocent lives were at stake. 11 p.m. Seagal approached the compound like smoke given form, moving through tall grass with supernatural stealth. 20 years of special operations training had taught him that successful infiltration was 90% patience and 10% violence. The first perimeter guard never saw him coming. A sleeper hold applied with surgical precision dropped the sentry unconsciously, his weapon secured before his body hit the ground. Seagal dragged him into shadows, zip-tied his hands, and continued inward. Motion sensors had been positioned for vehicle approach, not foot infiltration. Seagal slipped between electronic eyes, reading the compound's defensive psychology through its design flaws. These criminals expected overwhelming force, not surgical precision. The second guard fell to a pressure point strike that shut down his nervous system for 30 seconds, time enough for restraints and concealment. Each takedown was swift, professional, and non-lethal. Seagal killed only when absolutely necessary. And these men hadn't crossed that threshold yet he reached the main building without triggering alarms, testament to skills honed in conflicts most people never knew existed. Through thermal imaging, he tracked the remaining gang members, most gathered in the main room around Viper. 2 guards with Becky on the second floor. The building's architecture offered multiple entry points. Seagal selected a basement window, picking the lock with tools that had served him in dozens of operations. Inside, he moved through darkness like a predator born to hunt, avoiding creaking boards and sight lines with supernatural awareness. Voices drifted from above, Viper's angry planning, Torres demanding revenge, the casual cruelty of men who'd chosen violence as their life's work. Seagal cataloged positions and weapons through sound patterns, building a tactical picture in his mind that he reached the base of the stairs leading to Becky's prison. Above, her voice carried through thin walls, arguing with her captors, showing the Coleman courage even in captivity. Seagal checked his watch. 15 minutes until federal perimeter closure. Time to end this nightmare and bring an innocent girl home to her family. Seagal climbed the stairs with the precision of a ghost, each step calculated to avoid the creaking boards that would announce his presence. The old farmhouse groaned with age, but years of experience had taught him to read a building's weaknesses and strengths. Through a crack in the door, he saw Becky tied to a chair, her face defiant despite obvious fear. 2 gang members played cards nearby, their weapons within easy reach, but their attention focused on the game rather than their prisoner. The rescue began perfectly. Seagal eliminated both guards with silent efficiency, nerve strikes that dropped them unconscious without sound or struggle. He cut Becky's restraints, his fingers gentle as he checked for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he whispered. "No," she breathed, recognizing her mysterious rescuer from the diner. "How did you?" Sheriff Morrison's voice crackled through Seagal's earpiece, shattering the moment of triumph. "Stand down." Kane's been released on a federal procedural technicality. His confession was ruled inadmissible. The words hit like physical blows. Worse news followed. Kane had called the gang, warning them about the rescue attempt in exchange for safe passage out of state. The corrupt mayor had bought his freedom with Becky's life. Suddenly, floodlights blazed through the windows, turning night into harsh day. Sirens wailed from hidden speakers as Viper's voice boomed over a PA system that had been waiting for this moment. Steven Seagal, famous movie star, thinks he's a real hero. "Come down and face me like a man, or I put a bullet in this pretty girl's head right now." Seagal and Becky were trapped on the staircase, 15 armed gang members in the main room below. Spotlights eliminating concealment. Escape routes cut off by the betrayal of a corrupt official who'd chosen self-preservation over justice. Becky looked at him with absolute trust. "What do we do now?" Seagal's response was calm, determined, carrying the weight of 30 years preparing for exactly this moment. "Now we find out if movie fighting taught me anything about the real thing." He stepped into the spotlight, hands visible but ready, facing impossible odds with quiet confidence. The main room of the farmhouse blazed with harsh spotlights that turned shadows into weapons and exposed every detail with merciless clarity. Seagal descended the stairs with Becky behind him, facing 15 armed gang members arranged in a deadly semicircle. Viper Jackson held center stage, savoring his moment of triumph. Prison tattoos covered his arms like a roadmap of violence, and his pale eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. The famous Steven Seagal, Viper's voice dripped mockery. "Action hero, here to save the day. Except this ain't a movie, old man. You're outnumbered 15-1, and we're all armed. Seagal positioned himself between Becky and the gang, his movements fluid and controlled. He calculated angles, distances, weapon positions, the tactical mathematics of survival. His response came quietly but carried absolute authority. In my experience, it's not about the numbers. It's about who's willing to do whatever it takes to protect innocent people. Torres flexed his broken arm, eager for revenge. Pretty words won't stop bullets, movie star. Neither will anger, Seagal replied, centering himself with Aikido breathing. Techniques. Anger makes you stupid. Stupid gets you hurt. The psychological warfare continued as gang members shifted positions, trying to intimidate through display of weapons and threats. But Seagal remained centered, drawing on decades of martial arts philosophy that taught inner calm amid external chaos. Viper grew tired of the standoff. His criminal empire was crumbling, federal agents were closing in, and this Hollywood hero had humiliated his organization. Time for decisive action. Enough talking, Viper snarled, raising his pistol. Kill them both. As multiple weapons rose toward them, Seagal whispered to Becky without taking his eyes off the threat. When I move, get behind the overturned table and stay down. Then, louder, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades preparing for exactly this moment. Gentlemen, you're about to learn why they make movies about heroes. The violence began with the sudden fury of a summer storm. Chaos erupted as 15 gang members attacked simultaneously, but Seagal moved like flowing water, transforming their aggression into controlled motion. The first wave came with crude coordination, 3 men rushing from different angles, expecting overwhelming force to compensate for lack of skill. Seagal's Aikido training turned their momentum against them. He redirected the first attacker's charge into a devastating throw that sent the man crashing through a wooden chair. The second attacker's punch became a joint lock that hyperextended his elbow with an audible crack. The third found himself airborne, his own forward motion used to launch him into the wall with bone-jarring impact. The confined space worked in Seagal's favor. Gang members couldn't all attack at once without creating a traffic jam of bodies. And weapons. Those in back couldn't shoot without hitting their own men, while those in front became obstacles for those behind. The second wave brought weapons, knives, clubs, and desperate men swinging wildly. Seagal disarmed 3 bikers simultaneously, their own momentum carrying blades into walls and furniture. A seized knife became a joint lock tool. A grab club turned into a lever for another throw. Torres charged with a broken bottle, his injured arm forgotten in rage. Seagal sidestepped the clumsy attack, applied a pressure point that shut down Torres's nervous system, and watched him collapse into unconsciousness. Each movement flowed into the next like a deadly dance. Seagal never kept a weapon long enough to be targeted, never stayed in one position long enough to be surrounded. The gang's numbers became their weakness as they stumbled over fallen comrades and got in each other's way that a shotgun blast shattered. Plaster near Seagal's head, but he was already moving, using the blast distraction to close distance and disarm the shooter with a wrist control that sent the weapon spinning harmlessly away. In 90 seconds of controlled violence. 14. Gang members lay unconscious or incapacitated around the room. Furniture was destroyed, walls were cracked, and the air smelled of sweat and fear. Only Viper Jackson remained standing, backing toward Becky with desperation, replacing his earlier confidence. The destroyed farmhouse main room looked like a battlefield. After the storm had passed, 14 gang members lay unconscious among overturned furniture and broken glass, their weapons scattered harmlessly across debris-strewn floors. Only Viper Jackson remained standing, his back against the wall, a knife pressed to Becky's throat as she stood frozen in terror. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the reality of his situation penetrated his criminal arrogance. Stay back. Viper's voice cracked with desperation. I'll cut her throat. I swear I'll do it. Seagal stood motionless 15 feet away, reading every micro-expression on Viper's face, cataloging the gang leader's emotional state and physical positioning. Fear made men predictable, and Viper was drowning in fear. You think you're some kind of righteous warrior? Viper snarled, trying to project confidence he no longer felt. I've killed better men than you. Prison taught me things your movies never could. I don't think I'm righteous, Seagal responded quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. I just think some people deserve protection from predators like you. Viper's desperation led to tactical error. Confident that his hostage provided protection, he lunged at Seagal while still holding Becky, expecting to drive the blade into his enemy's chest before the action hero could react. But Seagal had been reading the telegraphed attack from the moment Viper's muscles began to tense. He moved with lightning precision in one flowing motion that embodied 30 years of martial arts mastery. His left hand redirected the knife away from Becky's throat, while his right hand struck Viper's wrist with surgical accuracy, breaking bones and sending the weapon spinning harmlessly away. A pressure point strike to the gang leader's neck shut down his nervous system, and Viper Jackson collapsed unconscious at Seagal's feet. Becky was free, unharmed, staring at her rescuer with amazement and gratitude. The knife embedded itself harmlessly in a wooden beam. Its threat ended forever. FBI agents stormed through the doors to find the situation resolved with typical Seagal efficiency. No deaths, minimal collateral damage, just professional problem solving. Applied with precise violence. Dawn broke over the Miller Farm compound like redemption itself, painting the sky in shades of hope and justice. FBI agents processed the crime scene with professional efficiency while paramedics treated unconscious gang members who would wake to face federal charges. Agent Martinez surveyed the destruction with professional amazement. 15 armed criminals had been neutralized by one man without a single fatality, surgical precision applied with mathematical efficiency. How did you take them all down without killing anyone? She asked Seagal. Violence should always be the last resort, he replied, helping Becky down the farmhouse stairs. But when innocent people are threatened, sometimes good men have to do hard things. The federal investigation unfolded with swift justice. Viper Jackson faced life imprisonment for kidnapping, racketeering, and conspiracy. His gang members, presented with overwhelming evidence and lengthy sentences, quickly accepted plea deals in exchange for testimony against organized crime networks spanning 3 states. Mayor Kane's corruption charges were refiled with additional evidence gathered during the raid. His political career lay in ruins, his reputation destroyed, his freedom measured in years rather than decades. Consolidated Agriculture faced federal investigation for conspiracy, bribery, and environmental crimes. Stock prices plummeted as investors fled. The CEO resigned in disgrace, and congressional hearings were scheduled to investigate corporate terrorism against American farmers. At Cedar Ridge Community Hospital, the Coleman family was reunited in a moment that restored faith in human goodness. Becky received medical clearance, bruised but unbroken, her spirit intact despite the ordeal. Frank shook Seagal's hand with the grip of a man who understood debt that could never be repaid. How do we thank someone who gave us our daughter back? Thank your community. Seagal deflected with characteristic humility. They stood together when it mattered. I just provided temporary security while justice took its course. The conspiracy had been completely dismantled through legal channels, vindicated by tactical intervention that proved sometimes heroes were more than Hollywood fantasy. Outside, Cedar Ridge began the process of healing, its people free to live without fear. 2 weeks after the nightmare ended, the Coleman farm buzzed with the energy of renewal. Volunteers from across the county arrived at dawn, their trucks loaded with lumber, seed, and determination. The burned wheat field would rise again, stronger than before. Frank Coleman watched from his porch as neighbors he'd known for decades worked alongside strangers who'd driven hours to help. The insurance settlement, expedited due to federal crime. Victim compensation provided funds not just for replacement, but for modernization. Becky had returned from college with more than textbooks this time. Her agricultural business plans were becoming reality. Sustainable farming techniques that would protect soil and water for future generations. Cooperative marketing that would give family farms leverage against corporate buyers. Legal protections that would prevent another consolidated agriculture from terrorizing rural communities. Look at this, she called to her father, pointing to survey stakes marking new irrigation lines. Drip irrigation will cut water usage by 40% while increasing yield. The Peterson family, who'd started packing to leave after losing their barn, returned to rebuild with community support. The Martinez family's contaminated well was cleaned and equipped with new filtration systems. 3 families that corporate terrorism had tried to destroy were now thriving with technological upgrades and legal protections. Sheriff Morrison supervised the installation of new communication equipment, funded by state grants that recognized Cedar Ridge as a model for rural security. His department would double in size, equipped to handle threats that had once seemed overwhelming. Federal legislation inspired by the Cedar Ridge case was moving through Congress. The Family Farm Protection Act would provide new legal remedies against corporate intimidation tactics. Environmental protections that couldn't be waived by corrupt local officials, and federal oversight of agricultural land acquisitions. As evening approached, the community gathered for a harvest celebration that honored not just crops, but survival. Tables groaned under potluck dishes, children played in newly planted fields, and adults shared stories of standing together against impossible odds. Seagal watched from the farmhouse porch, preparing to leave as quietly as he'd arrived. The Coleman family sat with him, reluctant to say goodbye to the man who'd given them their future back. The Coleman farmhouse porch felt like a sanctuary in the golden evening light. Seagal packed his survey equipment with the same methodical precision he brought to everything, while the family gathered around him like he was an uncle preparing for a long journey. "Why did you risk your life for strangers?" Becky asked, the question that had haunted her since the rescue. Seagal paused in his packing, considering words that could explain a lifetime of service. Family farms represent everything good about America: hard work, generational wisdom, caring for the land and community. When that's threatened, it's everyone's responsibility to help. Frank offered payment again, pulling out an envelope thick with insurance money. Seagal refused with a gentle smile. "Some things can't be bought, Mr. Coleman. The satisfaction of seeing good people safe is payment enough." Donna insisted he stay for dinner, and he accepted gracefully. The meal became a celebration of ordinary heroism, good people doing right things because they were needed, not for recognition or reward. Over pot roast and homemade bread, they talked about everything except the violence that had brought them together. Seagal shared stories of his environmental work, the communities he'd helped, the quiet satisfaction of protecting places that mattered. The family spoke of their dreams for the farm, plans that now seemed possible instead of desperate. After dinner, Seagal walked through the replanted wheat field with Becky, their conversation flowing like old friends rather than hero and rescued. "Damsel, are you really just an environmental consultant who happens to be an action hero?" she asked. "I'm someone who learned that the skills I developed for movies could serve a higher purpose," he replied, running green shoots through his fingers. "Sometimes the universe puts the right person in the right place. The rest is just doing what needs to be done." They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge over Montana farmland that would feed families for generations. The Coleman legacy was secure, protected not by Hollywood fantasy, but by genuine heroism applied with surgical precision. "Thank you," Becky whispered. "Thank your family," Seagal replied. "They reminded me why some fights are worth having." Morning brought Sheriff Morrison to the Coleman farm as Seagal loaded his truck. The lawman carried official reports and unofficial gratitude in equal measure. "Federal developments you should know about," Morrison began, spreading documents on the truck's tailgate. "The Crimson Skulls network has been dismantled across 3 states. Organized crime connections severed, other communities protected from similar schemes." Seagal studied arrest records and seizure reports. 18 separate operations had been shut down, millions in illegal assets recovered, dozens of criminals facing federal time. One night's violence had rippled across the criminal underground like an earthquake. Consolidated Agriculture faces billions in fines and federal oversight. Morrison continued. Their predatory practices are effectively ended. The CEO's congressional testimony was educational. Cedar Ridge had become a model for rural communities fighting agricultural gentrification. The town council had passed ordinances protecting family farms from corporate intimidation, inspired by their experience with real-world terrorism. A scholarship fund established in Seagal's honor would help children of family farmers study agricultural law and business. "Any regrets about getting involved?" Morrison asked. "My only regret would be walking away when good people needed help," Seagal replied, checking his maps for the next assignment. "Some fights choose you." This one chose me the moment Torres put his hands on that girl. A crowd gathered as word spread of Seagal's departure. The entire community turned out. Farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, children who'd grown up safe because one man had refused to let evil prosper. Seagal declined formal recognition but accepted their gratitude with characteristic grace. Heroes don't seek credit, he told the assembled crowd. They just do what's necessary and move on to where they're needed next. Frank Coleman stepped forward as community spokesman. Steven, you gave us more than safety. You gave us hope that good people can still win against impossible odds. Good people always win, Seagal replied. Sometimes they just need a little help evening the odds. He climbed into his truck, waving goodbye to faces that had become more than strangers. Cedar Ridge would remember this summer as the season evil came calling and met its match. Seagal's pickup truck rolled through the Cedar Ridge town limits for the last time, headed for Interstate 90 and whatever assignment awaited in Wyoming. His secure phone had already brought news of environmental violations at a Native American reservation, where corporate interests threatened traditional ways of life. The cycle continued, threats emerging wherever good people tried to live honest lives, predators seeking easy victims, corruption masquerading as progress. But defenders emerged too, sometimes from the most unlikely places. In his rearview mirror, the Coleman farm spread golden with new wheat under autumn sunshine. Becky's sustainable farming techniques were being studied by agricultural colleges. Frank's community organizing had inspired neighboring counties, and Donna's teaching had resumed with expanded programs for rural youth. Sheriff Morrison had his enhanced department. Federal agents maintained liaison offices in 3 counties, and Mayor Kane's successor was chosen specifically for his incorruptible reputation. Cedar Ridge had learned that standing together against corruption worked, but only when good people were willing to take risks for what was right. Seagal permitted himself a rare smile. Balance had been restored, justice had prevailed, and innocent people were safe to live their lives in peace. The environmental consultant cover had worked perfectly, providing access to rural communities where corporate crime flourished in shadows. His radio crackled with reports from ahead: mysterious livestock deaths, contaminated water supplies, federal investigators requesting assistance. The next community needed help, and Steven Seagal would answer the call that he'd spent decades playing heroes on movie screens, entertaining audiences with fantasy violence and impossible stunts. But real heroism was quieter, protecting families who'd never know his name, stopping crimes that would never make headlines, ensuring that good people could sleep safely in their homes. The road stretched ahead toward distant mountains, carrying him toward the next battle between good and evil. Somewhere, someone needed protection from predators who thought rural America was defenseless. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. 6 months after the Cedar Ridge incident, Steven Seagal stood on a windswept mesa overlooking the Pine Ridge Reservation in Wyoming, his weathered hands holding a folder thick with environmental violation reports. The spring air carried the scent of sage and something else, the acrid smell of contaminated water that had been poisoning the Wind River for 3 months. His secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from FBI Environmental Crimes Division. Corporate dumping confirmed. Stellar Mining Corporation. Local law enforcement compromised. Need immediate assessment. Below him, the reservation sprawled across thousands of acres of ancestral land, its small communities connected by dirt roads, and generations of shared struggle. Smoke rose from modest homes where families had lived for centuries, their connection to the land deeper than any corporate understanding of profit margins. Seagal's truck descended the Mesa Road, passing signs marking tribal boundaries and warnings about water usage. His cover story was already established. Dr. Stephen Lawson, hydrologist, contracted by the Environmental Protection Agency to assess groundwater contamination. The credentials were genuine, earned through years of environmental science study that had begun as research for movie roles and evolved into professional expertise. The reservation's main town consisted of a trading post, clinic, and community center surrounding a central plaza where elders gathered to discuss problems that seemed to multiply with each passing season. Seagal parked outside the clinic, noting the unusual number of children being treated for respiratory ailments and stomach disorders. Dr. Maria Blackhorse emerged from the clinic, her tired eyes reflecting the burden of treating symptoms without Addressing causes. At 35, she'd returned to the reservation after medical school to serve her people, only to watch them sicken from environmental poisoning. She couldn't stop. Dr. Lawson? She extended her hand with professional courtesy, tempered by wariness. I'm Dr. Blackhorse. We spoke on the phone about the water quality issues. Seagal nodded, studying her face and reading the exhaustion that came from fighting institutional indifference. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I understand you've documented unusual illness patterns. 43 cases of severe gastrointestinal distress in the past month, 18 children with respiratory complications, and water that's testing positive for heavy metals and industrial chemicals. Her voice carried controlled anger. The State Environmental Office claims their tests show acceptable levels. Either their equipment is faulty or they're lying. They walked toward the river that had sustained the tribe for generations, now running with a subtle discoloration that spoke of corporate contamination. Seagal collected water samples with professional precision, his portable testing equipment confirming Dr. Blackhorse's worst fears. Chromium, mercury, industrial solvents, he read from the digital display. Levels that exceed federal safety standards by factors of 10 to 20. This isn't accidental runoff. It's systematic dumping. Can you prove it? Dr. Blackhorse asked, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in months. I can try. Seagal packed his equipment, already formulating plans that went beyond simple environmental assessment. But first, I need to understand the opposition. Research that evening revealed Stellar Mining Corporation's pattern of environmental crimes. Spanning 6 states, CEO Jonathan Reeves had built his fortune by extracting maximum profit while externalizing environmental costs onto communities too poor or isolated to fight back. The Wyoming operation was his most ambitious, rare earth mining that generated enormous profits and toxic waste in equal measure. Local Sheriff Brad Newcomb had received substantial campaign contributions from Stellar Mining, his departments. New equipment and vehicles bearing corporate logos as evidence of purchased loyalty. State environmental regulators rotated through lucrative consulting positions with mining companies, creating revolving doors that ensured favorable interpretations of environmental law. The tribal council met that evening in the community center, their faces etched with generations of experience dealing with broken promises and legal betrayals. Chairman Robert Windwalker, 73 years old and sharp as winter wind, listened to Seagal's preliminary findings with the patience of someone who'd heard many white men make many promises. Dr. Lawson, we appreciate your concern. Chairman, Windwalker said carefully, but we've been fighting this battle for 3 months. Lawyers, environmental groups, media attention, nothing changes. Stellar Mining has permits, politicians, and more money than we can imagine. What if money and permits weren't enough? Seagal asked quietly. The room fell silent as tribal members read something in his tone that suggested more than academic environmental assessment. Chairman Windwalker studied Seagal's face with eyes that had learned to recognize warriors regardless of their current occupation. Dr. Lawson, are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if your people are ready to see justice served through whatever means necessary. Seagal's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades protecting communities that couldn't protect themselves. Because systematic poisoning of children crosses lines that academic reports can't address. Dr. Blackhorse leaned forward, medical ethics warring with maternal instincts. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that sometimes environmental problems require more than environmental solutions. Seagal stood, his decision made. I'm proposing that Stellar Mining Corporation is about to learn that some communities have protectors they never expected. Outside, stars emerged over the reservation with crystalline clarity, their light reflecting off poisoned water that would soon run clean again. Steven Seagal, environmental consultant and protector of the innocent, prepared for another battle. Between corporate greed and traditional values, the cycle continued, evil emerging wherever good people tried to live honest lives. But defenders emerged too, sometimes carrying government credentials and always carrying the determination to ensure that justice prevailed regardless of corporate power or political corruption. Tomorrow, Stellar Mining Corporation would discover that some environmental assessments came with teeth. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.